Welcome back to the Hive Doctor, your beekeeping mentor. It's my job to take the guesswork out of beekeeping for you. And today's guesswork that I'm taking out is the first spring hive inspection. I'm going to tell you what elements that you need to look for when you're inspecting your bees that have come through winter and you're seeing them for the first time in spring. So there's a few elements first that you need to be aware of in order to do your first hive inspection in the spring. And that's the environmental elements. First off, the temperature needs to be warm enough. Right now we're in the upper 50s, and you should also have little to no breeze. You don't want there to be a chill factor in the wind, because when you're doing a hive inspection and you're pulling out frames of brood, that wind can chill that brood and kill it. And that's not one of our objectives as beekeepers. Ideally, spring in your area means that something is blooming that bees work, and you see them active. You see the bees coming and going. So if you've got the elements involved where it's warm enough, mid-50s and higher with little to no breeze, your bees are active, they're bringing in pollen from something, then it's a fairly safe bet that it's time to go ahead and do your first hive inspection. I'm in one of my yards today that overwintered in 5-frame nuke boxes. And I've got deep hive bodies behind me that I'm going to be transferring those bees into from those nuke boxes. I haven't actually looked in these nuke boxes yet. I wanted you to see them for the first time with me so that you didn't just see a video with ideal thriving hives, because that's what we all want. But I might run into a hive that's not doing that great, and I want you to see it and see how I assess the situation and how I go about analyzing what needs to be done, if anything. So we're going to be looking into these nuke boxes for our first spring hive inspections for the first time together. All right, so let me explain the setup I've got here. I've got one of my new modified bottom boards in place. You can see it right here. I got a cleaned up, freshly painted deep hive body with 5 frames missing so that I have room for my nuke to go into. And remember, since it's a 5-frame nuke, I'll be transferring all 5 frames from the nuke box into my deep hive body to give them room to grow for springtime. The queen is laying, she's laying a lot, they're bringing in pollen, and that pollen tells the queen to lay. So they're going to be increasing their population from here until the middle of summer or so. Let's see what we've got. I've smoked their entrance, smoked inside this feeder hole. I'm going to pop the lid and smoke just a little bit as well. My first impression, I don't see as many bees as I have seen in some of my other hives this time of year, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. Here are the bees showing on the top bars, and there's quite a few bees in between the frames, but they're not on all 5 frames. They're not just busting at the seams. As long as they've got brood and a good laying queen and enough food, they're going to be just fine. And then once I put them into the deep hive body, they'll just start to grow even more. All right, so I'm going to take out the first frame, and that should always be an outside frame. You don't want to take out a frame from the middle. That's likely where the queen's going to be. And if you take that frame out first, you're likely to injure her. Okay, so the outside of my outside frame has nothing on it. It's dry. And right here they've got a little bit of nectar they're bringing in. So I'm going to put that with the nectar facing towards the inside of the hive. My next frame, I can already tell, has a lot more food on it. I see capped honey. There's more bees on it as well. And as you can see, there's our capped honey. Very calm bees. Right here on this side, we've got capped honey as well, but we also have a nice patch of capped brood with the area around it with larvae. And then a little bit further out from there, I see eggs down in the bottom of the cells. Now, I see one cell with 2 eggs, and that's not really a good sign. That could be a failing queen or a laying worker. That's not good news. We'll know more as we get deeper into our inspection. So now we're at the middle frame of our 5-frame nuke. I expect to see a lot more brood on a frame in the middle, and I do. There's more eggs, more capped brood. And one thing you do not need to do, that you probably think you do need to do, is in a hive inspection, you don't necessarily have to spot a queen. You never have to spot a queen, although I did. She's right here. Much longer abdomen, tapers off. Nice looking queen. She's laid eggs on both sides. We've got a little bit of capped brood. and then that brood is kind of rainbowed with pollen. They do that a lot. But what I was saying about not always having to search for your queen, don't freak out if you can't find your queen. It's better to look for evidence of the queen. And the evidence is going to be that she's laying eggs. Other evidence of a queen is the bee's demeanor. Are they calm, or are they kind of irritated and easily agitated towards you? Okay, next frame, it's got mostly pollen. And right now, our main pollen source is maple tree. That happens to be the thing that blooms first in a lot of areas of the US. Sometimes it's willow or a ground cover, a small flower. As far as the elements of this hive, for their size, I would say they have plenty of food. This next frame, there are no bees on, but there is capped honey. If you ever suspect that your bees don't have enough, you could start feeding. One thing I like to do also to kind of stimulate them is to just barely squash the caps so we can get some of this honey out. And then when you put it back in the hive, they'll immediately start to lick that up and clean up the area, but it also gets them some food in their bellies. Once I've got them in place, I scrape the top bars of any beeswax I have, being careful not to harm any bees, of course. And then I space my frames evenly so I don't have any areas where there's weird buildup of comb that they're trying to fill in the space of. And now that they're in here, it's just time to put the hive cover on and move on to the next hive. Now I realize some of you may be wondering, what about those multiple eggs I saw in the bottom of the cells? What should I do about that? Well, right now I don't feel like I need to do anything. Sometimes they correct that themselves. I saw a queen, so I highly doubt there's a laying worker in there. She might just be failing. Perhaps she did not mate very well last year when she was a virgin queen. Sometimes it's better to just let the bees alone to see if they can fix something themselves rather than go to heroics and take a bunch of action. I could go and get brood from another hive and give it to them. It may or it may not work. I have seen bees fix themselves, and I've also seen bees dwindle into nothing. It's just part of beekeeping. And I found that sometimes when I go to those heroics to try to save a hive, I end up doing more detriment and harm to them than good. My intentions were there, but I've learned over the 20 plus years I've been in beekeeping, sometimes there's certain situations that you just need to not freak out and let them do their thing. I can check back in on them in a week, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, and see if the situation has changed. If it's not, then perhaps I'll take some action then if they've not corrected it themselves. Let's go ahead and move on to the next hive so that you see the difference in hives. Hopefully we'll see one that's a little bit stronger, a little bit more built up. We're gonna work on this 5-frame nuke now. We'll go ahead and smoke them so they know I'm coming. And I'm gonna get the equipment prepared and ready to transfer them into. So I've moved the 5-frame nuke aside and put their new deep hive body right here in their place. And I can already tell by lifting that 5-frame nuke that they've got good weight to them. They've got enough food. Now it's just a matter of seeing the condition of their brood and incoming nectar and the quality of their queen. Just like before, we're going to remove the first frame. And the first frame has got capped honey on it, nothing on the outside. And remember, whenever you transfer frames, you always want to keep the dry side away from the center. You want to put their food and resources facing the center. Especially when it comes to brood, you really want to keep that just the way you found it. Never break up a brood nest with an empty frame or a frame of honey. They need to keep that brood nest at a constant. They'll grow it themselves. You don't need to expand it or try to entice them to do so. Now, here's a frame with a little bit of capped honey, much more capped brood than the last hive we saw. And then under that capped brood, we've got larvae and eggs, and then pollen below that. And that's a good structure of a brood nest. Over here, we've got pollen and capped honey, no eggs yet. So we will face that to the outside and the brood towards the inside. And again, I'm not making a big deal about if I find the queen or not. I just saw eggs, so I know that they have a queen. If I see the queen, great. And in fact, we see her. Usually I find it's easier to find the queen when you're not looking for her. She's right there at the end of my hive tool. Notice how she's on the capped honey. She can be anywhere. All right, a lot of this area right here is laid full of eggs, and the pattern looks much better than the last nuke, and there's only single eggs in the bottom of each one. So this is a better quality queen than the last one. Oh yes, look at that. So when it comes to capped brood and reading a frame, that's the fun part in beekeeping. Capped brood has 3 different colors. I learned this from someone else, it's not something I invented. And those 3 different colors are called light biscuit, medium biscuit, and dark biscuit. The lighter that biscuit color, the newer the brood. The darker the biscuit color, the older the brood, and therefore that's the brood that's going to emerge and add to the population more quickly than the younger brood. This has a beautiful pattern of capped brood. On the outside edges of that we've got larvae and then eggs, and then they have pollen surrounding that. They feed that pollen to their brood. They structure everything wonderfully. Now, knowing that my queen is on this frame and that she's on the outside, I want to be especially careful when placing this frame in. I'm going to put it down, then scoot it towards the other frame, kind of bumping it as I go to tell the bees, hey, move out of the way. I don't want to squish you. We've got 2 more frames to put in there before we're done. This is a very calm hive, which is another indicator of a good queen. There's no brood on this frame, but again, we've got plenty of honey. Honey there. We don't need to feed this hive at all, especially because we have things blooming. And all this honey, they made it through the winter with, and they have this much left over. Now this is a dry frame. If you had a frame of honey from a dead out hive, you could certainly give it to them and you wouldn't be hurting them one bit. But they have room to grow. I don't have to worry about tending to them or swarming immediately, and I can leave here today feeling really good about my bees, especially when they look like this. There's something about spring that gives beekeepers this magical feeling of growth and expansion, especially when they see their bees. So now I'm going to smoke them, get them to go down. I need to scrape these top bars just a little bit before I put their hive cover on and move on to the next. Now, I'm not going to cover any more hive inspections today with you. You saw an example of one that was not ideal, with a queen laying multiple eggs. That's something I have chosen not to do anything about today. I'm going to give them a chance to correct that, which I have seen them do, and then come back in a week or 2 and see how things are going. And then you got to have a look at a nice, healthy, growing hive with a great quality queen. They're expanding, they're bringing in pollen and nectar, they're growing, and it feels good to see that kind of thing in beekeeping. That's what we want. So if you've already done your hive inspection, or you have questions about doing your first spring hive inspection, let me know in the comments below. Drop me one of these and tell your friends about the Hive Doctor. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.